Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms, and these are Charter Moms Chats, where we go live with experts sharing information that families need to know to help their kids get a great education. And it's enrollment season, and we've been featuring schools that are taking applications. But there's a lot more to parenting than just choosing the right schools. It's also how you support your children and how you make sure that their schools are serving their needs. And so to talk about how to support kids who have anxiety disorders. We have an expert, a longtime friend, Abby. I'm so glad to have you on Charter Moms Chats. So, Dr. Abby Hasberry is a therapist, author, executive coach, and educator. And she wrote a guest post for the SA Charter Moms blog. So, if you go to sachartermoms.com, it's on top of the feed. And I'm so happy to get to have a conversation with Abby about what's in the blog post. So, Abby, take it away.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and just really excited to be talking to you. I think it's a long time coming, so so it was inevitable. So I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I want to touch on is that you are launching your counseling practice, and so I've known you in different phases of your life, like as a school leader and things like that. But so you're launching your counseling practice. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your counseling practice and kind of what is the mission and vision of what you're trying to accomplish through your work.
Yeah, so Dear Abby Counseling, I have Dear Abby, and I've broken down the Dear into four kind of principles that I live by: diversity, empathy, advocacy, and respect. And so when I think about counseling in general, like those are the principles. I came to counseling really a long journey to counseling. I came after a career in education, but I came really because I wanted to be a representative voice that I didn't see of one minority therapists. There just aren't very many. And then really the thing that brought me in was being an adoption informed therapist. And so that's kind of what really brought me in. And so a lot of the work that I do is around adoption and identity. But because of my background with education and being an educator and a principal, one of the things that I also see a lot of are adolescents with anxiety. And so adolescents are a huge part of my practice, as well as couples in addition. So I'm excited to be here to talk about it all.
I'm so glad that you're launching your practice, and it comes up in the discussion group sometimes, like the Facebook discussion
Yeah.
group, that families are looking for therapy for their children, especially teens, and it's been a rough few years, but it's always
Yeah.
important to pay attention to like how your kids are feeling, and just don't always just expect them to tough it out. That there might be something more serious going on, and it helps to have an ally. Um, so like this post is talking about specifically anxiety disorders. So I was wondering, can you kind of share like the definition, like what does it mean when a child has an anxiety disorder?
Yeah, so anxiety can be a result of lots of things. Cognitive results, like a mental disorder. It can be physical, it can be situational. Anxiety can be something historical factors like stress, emotional trauma, medical conditions, fear, just general and fear. We've seen a lot of more anxiety coming from kids having such incredible, like real-time access through social media. And so the things that have always happened in our society are on our kids' phones 24 hours a day. Whereas when we were younger, it was just maybe 1 hour in the evening during news. And we didn't even really want to watch that part of it, or we're doing homework or having dinner during that hour. So we just weren't exposed to the things that our kids are exposed to. So we're seeing a lot more anxiety kind of creep up in kids. And the interesting thing about anxiety is you think about like the fright, flight, or freeze responses. So anxiety comes up in those ways. And so you think about like panic attacks and that kind of flight response. That's what people think about when they think about anxiety. But what we often miss in kids are those other two responses, that freeze response and that fight response, I'm sorry. So that fight response, we often see that as kids who look almost defiant. They're talking back. They are making choices that may not be healthy. And it can be often a result of anxiety and that fight response, as opposed to that flight, that normal kind of stress that we think of. And the one that's really kind of ignored and almost not seen are those kids that go into freeze. And so those are kids who have anxiety that causes them to withdraw. It causes them to kind of shut down and just feel like they don't have a voice because they're so just caught up in whatever's going on in their head. So those latter two are the things, especially in school, that get misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all.
Right. That's really important that anxiety, it may not be what people think it is, right? It can present in other ways, and it's important to have compassion for the students who are feeling that way. And like you said,
Yes.
it's popping up more often than ever before. Um,
Yeah.
so I think one thing that like families, like like if you're realizing, like talking to your child and realizing that there may be an issue and they may be suffering from an anxiety disorder, then it's important to find a therapist to help. So in the blog post, you have some tips about how do you know it's the right therapist, like how many consultations you have to do, how do you get your child involved in that decision of, is this the right therapist? So what advice do you have for families who are looking for a therapist, and how do they know they found the right one?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about kind of my personal experience. I have three kids, and my two daughters both have anxiety, and both of them look very, very different. My older daughter, who I wrote about in the blog post, her anxiety is that freeze anxiety where she would just shut down. And what it ended up looking like is that she was just a really good, compliant, quiet student, but she was scared to death, and we didn't know it. And it took lots of talking to her and figuring out what was going on to really understand that, like, this kid who's all bubbly and is a cheerleader outside of home, why is she withdrawn in the class? Why are teachers saying that that she doesn't talk, she doesn't speak up? And we really found that anxiety going from fifth to sixth grade is when we realized what was happening. And it wasn't because I was looking for anxiety, but more because I was looking for, why is this really brilliant kid not being tracked for the pre-AP classes as she's going into middle school? Like, what is she showing up with in school? And so we decided to take her to the therapist because we realized, just kind of looking through things, she was the kid who wouldn't order her own food. She would whisper to me and say, hey, can you tell them I want this? But she was also a kid who would go out in a huge auditorium at the Alamo Dome and do a cheer competition. So things just weren't adding up. So we decided that she should probably go to a therapist. And what we did is we talked to her about, like, the things that were most important to her. What are you looking for? Like, who do you feel most comfortable talking to? We started with tell me about your favorite teacher and why is that person your favorite teacher? And so she talked about Mr. Bennett, who was at Wonky Elementary School in NISD. And she talked about how, for one, he was the same color as her. He was a Black man. And she talked about how that was important to her, that he just kind of understood how she presented, especially in her class where she was one of, I think, two Black kids in the school. And so she said that it was important that someone would understand kind of her presentation and what she goes through. She then also talked about how she wanted someone who was really laid back. The teachers that were more in her face kind of made her nervous. So she wanted a therapist who would kind of sit back and just have a really even-keeled temperament. She also talked about, I'm trying to think what else. She said that while she loved Mr. Bennett, what she really wanted was a woman. So we started going through all of the things that she wanted. So when you're looking for a therapist for your child, talk to them and ask them, like, who is the person you connect with and why? Like, what are all the aspects that make you want to connect with them? And then we started to look for a therapist. And the things that were important to me were more practical. So I wanted them to be either close to my house or to my school. I needed them to take my insurance, although now as a practitioner, insurance isn't as important to me, and maybe we can talk about that, but that's a completely different tangent. And I wanted someone who really understood, like, her specific disorder once we realized as parents that she was kind of in an anxious state. So those are the things that I would definitely suggest, to ask those questions. And then we had her write down a list of questions that she wanted to ask them. She wanted to ask things like, how did you like school when you were growing up? What's your favorite kind of music? She asked, I'm trying to remember the questions she asked, what would you do if I came to you with a problem that I didn't want to talk to my mom about? So she asked the therapist some questions, and then I came up with some that I wanted to know as well. And when we went into it, I told her it's kind of like dating. You're going to have to go through a couple of therapists before you find someone who you really connect with, and that's okay. So my biggest tip is use those free 15-minute consultations and really come in there to see it as, like, do we connect? Is there rapport being built or not?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really helpful. I really appreciate that in the blog post and here in the interview, like you're able to share from your own family, and you're
Yeah.
drawing on your experience as a therapist, as an educator, school leader, and as a mom, as it makes it more relatable, because like we're all like we were talking about before we were on the air, like like I question myself and what impact my parenting is having on my kids, and I feel like the advice that you're given the blog post is relevant, beyond just families who are really worried about a problem, but there's a lot of things that I think every parent can benefit from, like thinking about
Yeah.
how we can do things better. Like, so, like, for example, like one of the things you cover in the blog post is self advocacy skills, right? So you just talked about like what questions your daughter wanted to ask the therapist before deciding like who was the right therapist, but it goes beyond just the therapy session of like when they're out in the world, like how do they ask for support if they're in a situation where they're struggling. So what advice do you have about supporting kids as they learn those self advocacy skills?
So definitely model, model, model. Like as parents, we are that first teacher of our kids. So modeling that for ourselves. So making sure that I tell her, I needed to get help with this. So I talk about my struggles with my kids often, so they understand that like struggling is normal, asking for help is normal, and this is how you do it. But also modeling for kids. When I was a principal, I often had parents who would come into 504 IEP meetings without their child. And I think that that's kind of doing our kid a disservice, especially as they get into middle school and high school, because what they need to see is how you're communicating with the teachers, one, about whatever the concern is, the presenting concern is, but also about how things that what educational supports they need and why. They should be able to articulate it just as well as you do. So bringing them into the meetings, into conversations, and talking about what it is that they need and why, so they understand it. My younger daughter suffers a lot from a different kind of anxiety. She has a pretty severe OCD. I didn't write about her in the blog post, but she has a pretty severe OCD disorder right now. And so it's been really important for us to be able to talk to her, not only about like what's going on in her brain, but also what are the things that she can surround herself with, like what helps her process it. And then we talk about like, so if you were to have the worst day in school ever, what would you need as well as far as supports to make that day better? And so she actually came up with things that were going to be accommodations for her. One of the things was signaling to her teachers that she could just walk out of the room when she needed to without making a big deal about it, and having a place where she could go and a person that she could go to who would just know she's there and not ask her a bunch of questions. And she said, like, this is what I need. I just need some time to be quiet, and I don't want people asking me if I'm okay. So that was part of that. And her being able to say, like, this is what I need in the moment, that's like the start of the self-advocacy skills. And she really started that probably about maybe ninth grade, eighth or ninth grade. She's a junior this year, and this absolutely floored me this year. The second day of school, she came downstairs in the morning and said, can you print this out for me? And I printed it out, 7 copies, to her teachers. And it was a letter that she had written introducing herself to her teachers and talking about the things that she needs, the struggles that she has, the triggers that she has, and then what she needs to get back on track. And completely unsolicited from me, but kind of like we modeled it over the years, having conversations with her teachers and with the administrators about what she needed. So I would say the self-advocacy comes from modeling, and then having them practice it in a safe environment with you, have them practice it within a safe environment with the therapist, and then bringing it into the school for sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. I mean, I feel that, and it's partly like we're not just raising our kids just to graduate from high school or graduate from college. Like, we're raising them so they can be independent adults, and so like like high school is a chance for them to practice those skills, but
Yeah.
not in the whole wide world. But it's still it's a pretty big, scary environment. There's a lot of distractions, a lot of stimuli, and they're dealing with adults who are maybe more subject matter experts and maybe not as expert on the pedagogy or on
Yeah.
like the sort of social emotional learning aspect. So um, yeah, that makes it challenging for kids. But you're modeling and you're teaching your daughters the skills that they need to be self advocates, in high school and beyond.
And
Um,
beyond. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I mean, a big part of it's not just like we've been talking about, like what your daughter's experience, but there's also what you've been experiencing through this whole process. That it's really important for the parent to practice self care, because you're pouring so much into your kids that you have to make sure that your reservoir is is well cared for. So
Yes.
how did what was you talk about in the post, like, that you discovered your discovery that self-care is really important.
Yeah, it's that old like flight attendant thing, put your mask on yourself before you put it on your child. Like, absolutely. I found that that was really important. Every time I started to worry more for my kids than for me, I got so overwhelmed. And that's when I would have, like, I can't do this. This is too hard. So I definitely found that self care was super important. And when people think about self care, they think about like a spa getaway or all of those things. And that's really not, I mean, that is self care, yes, but that's not realistic self care. While I do things like journaling, I journal often. I do also meditate often as well. But the things that really get me kind of like just to relax and to do what I need to do to be able to do it the next day are things like watching Netflix documentaries. I love documentaries. And so allowing myself, an hour to just kind of turn my brain off and do that, like that's like super important. The other thing that I really learned was like saying no and putting boundaries on my time and my capacity. When I knew my daughter's freshman year, my youngest daughter's freshman year was really, really trying for us. And it was hard for everyone and really hard for her, but hard for us as well. And that year, I knew that there were just things I had to say no to, and putting boundaries on my time. And even people would say, are you free? Yes, I'm free, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to fill that spot. Like making sure that I was okay with just taking time to be me and to sit in the space and to just reflect on what I was going through in that moment. And I would also say like getting a therapist for ourselves is super important too. Just having someone else who you can talk to and run things by and just kind of get some skills to kind of to self-regulate and calm down and do all the things that we need to do. Um, in that time period, I found something called brain spotting, which I now do in my practice. And brain spotting is an intervention that really allows you to heal trauma, past traumas that recent traumas, whatever it is, in a way that puts you in control. And so one of the things that I was always concerned with is like, how is this person who doesn't know my like extensive history going to heal something? But with brain spotting, it actually is the client who's doing the healing and finding that space and being able to even do that on my own now, because it is something you can teach yourself to do. That has been all of the self-care in the world. And if you think about the stresses that we go through when our kids are in crisis, it's not just your kid in crisis. You also have work demands. You also have family demands. You also have friendships that you're still trying to maintain. Anything else that's going on in your life that may be in crisis. And so we really have to take care of ourselves so that we're there able to take care of our kids.
Yeah, yeah. We in early 2021, our family experienced. My husband got laid off at work at the same time that my son was in crisis with the special education situation at his school, and I just remember thinking, like, "Wow, the universe is really testing me right now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
this is a lot." And then me having OCD tendencies, I
Yes.
made like a 5-page single space list of just like everything that I felt like was a burden on me, and it took about like 8 months, and I crossed off just about everything on the list.
I
And
absolutely love that. Yeah, I love that. How did you feel after doing that?
it was like it was amazing because it felt like I had dug myself out of a really big hole, and it felt like I felt like these hands were part of the problem solving. And also realizing that I was not alone, that I had a lot of friends and family, a lot of people who cared about us, who and like I got advice from all quarters of like I have a friend who lives in Round Rock, and like he's like, here, do this, call and like thank you, like there were just people who I didn't know, like, right, like I try to keep my professional mask on, I try to like, stay positive and things like that. But there were times when like off camera, I could kind of let my hair down or like let people know like, hey, I really want to do this project, but just so you know, I'm having a tough time. And people would, thank goodness I work in education, and so there's a lot of I get to work with a lot of really caring people, and just willing to share ideas and help problem solve, and we got through it. And it's not that everything's perfect, but by being vulnerable and yeah, and just acknowledging like, okay, this is a rough time. It's not always going to be like this. um I can use my network and my friends to solve this, and things will get better, and things have gotten better.
Yeah. And what an amazing example for your kiddos to see that too, to see you do the things that you need to do to advocate for yourself and also using your village to kind of build you back up. And so they will remember that and do the same thing when they need to.
Yeah, yeah. When it's, like we were talking about, like, before going there, like, this, I mean, this nonprofit and sanitary shore moms, this has been my passion, and I I'm I really I enjoy sharing about education and about school options, but I also want the families in our online community, and at our events, like, to know, just there's all kinds of resources out there to help, just to help us be the best parents and caregivers that we can be. And, like, no, I don't know everything, but if you're willing to ask, just like post a question in the group, and people are willing to help, and we've created like a positive environment where people feel safe, saying like, hey, I had this negative experience at this school, I want to change schools, where can I look at? And people will say like, oh, okay, yeah, we've been there too,
Yeah.
and people can be, you don't have to we don't have to pretend our kids are perfect, because they're not.
Yes.
Like, that is such a waste of energy. Like, we all
Yes.
need to acknowledge, like, it's not a competition, of like, "Oh, my kid got into this school," or "My kid does these activities." Like, great, I'm happy for them, but, every child, every family has their struggles too, and
Absolutely.
we shouldn't hide it and pretend that everything's perfect.
Yes, absolutely. That just reminds me of a funny my older daughter graduated high school in 3 years and then graduated college in 3 years. And people are always like, wow, she must be so brilliant. And yeah, of course, you're a principal, you pushed her. And like, absolutely not. She did high school in 3 years because she had anxiety and could not stand the building. So she had figured a way to get out, not because of anything other than that. And she did college in 3 years because of COVID, because she was taking online classes and didn't realize that normal college life means you're off during the summer. She just kept going because it's just more online classes. And it's just funny when people are like saying all of these things about, wow, she did this amazing thing. And I'm like, no, she did it because A, she had incredible anxiety, and B, because she didn't know better. Like, it's not. And I love to tell them that because people want to always paint such a rosy picture. And so if I post that she's graduating, I also need to say, like, this isn't like, we're not perfect. This was not a perfect situation. High school was so horrible for her that she needed to get out in 3 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate your vulnerability, and I try to model that as well, like, to the families in the discussion group, right? It's like, just because I run this blog, it doesn't mean I know everything about education.
Yes,
Like, we're making
absolutely.
up as we go along,
No.
and
Yeah.
we've got some run-ins, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing that you reflect on in the post that I feel like is really important is, like, like, the post is really helpful. This interview is really helpful. Like, you're sharing a lot of tips, but, like, you don't want to give people the impression that it was just like, oh, it's smooth sailing. We know all the answers. It's like, no, like, there's ups and downs. So I guess, how do you sort of reflect on that, and, like, kind of
Yeah.
like how far you've come?
Yeah, so you have kids and you want life to be unicorns and rainbows and flowers and sunshine for them. And then things hit and it sucks. And you're just like, what just happened? Like, this is not what I wanted for my kid. So you need patience, you need the village, you need to remember that the people who are surrounding you, whether it's educators, administrators, whatever, that they came into their profession because they want what's best for kids. I had to often remember that as a parent. I still have to remind myself that, because sometimes you feel like you're going in like you're ready to fight. You're going in with this kid who needs these things and you're ready to fight, and you forget that you have allies. And so making sure that you remember that to include these people as allies and not to think about them as adversaries, like that was really, really important for me. Um, and I think just remembering that other people have struggles too. And I think that's why I am so transparent about my struggles, because I want people to know that it's not just you, because I know every family struggles in some way at some point in their life, and there's no reason to hide it. We need to rally around each other. We really need to rally around our kids. So I think that that was really important to me too, is having people who were really supportive of my kids. And knowing that my situation was very different because I had been the head of school, or my kids were at school for many years. And so when I called a teacher and said, I need help, this is a person I hired. And so I recognized my privilege in that and said, like, I need to be vulnerable and transparent about my struggles so that people who don't have those connections understand that it's okay to ask for those connections as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a I mean, that's a big part. I hope that I haven't really been explicit about that. Maybe I should, but in the discussion group, but like part of what we talk about is like, if things aren't right, like it's okay to change schools, but and even before you do that, it's okay to like, talk to your child's teacher and say, hey, like this is what I'm concerned about, and if you're not getting the answers you want, take it up the chain of command.
Yes.
But like you said, don't treat it as adversarial. Like try to be constructive about
Yes.
it and try to be a listener because there's times when I was concerned about a situation and I just didn't have enough information, or I had some misconceptions about, what needs to happen for my kids to learn. And yeah, I mean, it's a growth process for as a parent and not only just for the kid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And for the teachers and the educators. And if you think about like the average age of teachers nowadays, they're coming in really young. They're 24,
Yeah.
25 years old. And
Yeah.
so part of what I did as a parent too is I felt like my job is to educate. Like I'm going to educate this person on what my child's condition is and what they need help with. So that the kid who comes around next gets kind of the benefit of that. Because you don't know what you don't know, and you
Yeah.
don't know it until you experience it. And so really understanding that these people, these teachers, administrators have all of the kids' best interests in mind all the time. They just may not have all the information. That's something I remind myself of all the time, even
Yeah.
still, even with my
Yeah.
daughter in college. I was like, oh, the teacher said what? And then I'm like, wait, no, bring it back, bring it back.
Right, right. That's where like you pass the torch and let your child be the
Yes,
advocate in that
yes,
situation.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And she is.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I want to make sure that folks know how to get in touch with you. And like I think that I mean, like you shared, thoughts about like how to find a therapist, and you're growing your practice. So, how can people reach out to you for advice?
So my website is dearabbycounseling.com. So absolutely you can reach out there and just kind of see a little bit about me and who I am. And then also they can email me at info@dearabbycounseling.com if you want to get in touch with me. If you want resources, if you want to connect. And also I am accepting new clients in my therapy practice right now as well. So either or.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm so happy to see, 'cause like, yeah, we've talked, over the years about your thoughts and your evolution, and I'm so happy to see your practice growing, and I'm really grateful for these resources for the website, and I'm going to share it in the discussion group, and I hope that it gets families thinking about how they can support their students, especially teens, and how they can teach them these principles like self advocacy and encouraging parents to practice self care as well.
Yes, yes, 100%. Self-care is the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, Abby, thank you so much. Thank you for the guest post. I look forward to working with you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right.